it's a real mixed bag now, because I had a very good American literature, and when I went on an expedition sometime, a long time ago really, sometime in the 60s, which virtually destroyed my collection. And I've never collected books since. In a way, it was kind of a blessing. All the more so as I grow older, I'm trying to unload stuff. I don't want all these weights. So, I don't know. I have a lot of modern novels. I probably have Dostoevsky, most of Conrad still. And then I have a lot of books that my contemporaries send me, their books. And a great many travel and nature books. I have a whole natural history, natural sciences collection, which I'm giving to the College at Southampton. And mainly I'm unloading books, because I just have too many, and they pile up, and publishers send out, all new writers send me these stuff. And so I'm giving them to this little Indian college. And they very like you described for Langston.
What I said was that when I came here 35 years ago, my friend Tom Staley, who was also your friend, had a grant to consult with Langston University about their library, and I got included in that. And my job was to look at the American literature books in the Langston Library, and I discovered that they were almost exclusively United States government books that had been issued to soldiers during World War II. All government issue books.
Very attractive looking,
The gray covers with...
enticing. Yeah, I'm afraid that's really true. I was also shocked to hear that these colleges, actually these books, they're burned by the ton. There's so many excess books. Much is being published. Most of that is thrown away. Remain selling those books and putting them where they're very badly needed. And Indian colleges have extra books but have to get through.
Maybe they'll keep them and not give them to a friend.
Oglala College.
Maybe they'll keep them and not give them to a friend who has a fire.
Oh.
I'm still keeping mine.
Yeah, well, okay.
Did your question have an extra point, I'll bet?
Well, I was particularly...
I was talking about me mostly, but to the degree I talked about it, yeah. Conrad, it's very fashionable in critical circles to say that must have an influence, who the writers who influence you. I cannot find an influence in the prose itself. Dr. Watson believes that Mr. Faulkner was an influence.
At least I'm going to say so.
Yeah. But Conrad, it certainly was. I was born on the ocean. I mean, I grew up as a baby on the sea. Outside of his style and mystery. Conrad was, I think, the writer who taught me that all good writing has strangeness in it, a mystery in it, and something.
Which I had.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do. Hey, this is really going to make the hairs stand up on the back of their necks, but that isn't the intention. But somehow, if you're going to a very deep place, this is what Conrad stuff is very strange. It's ominous, powerful stylist, especially since English wasn't his full diction used. I'll have to consider that. At my age, be walking along the beach, I live on a mile, and I'm drowning. If you go out there in that surf, you're going to drown too. You probably drown before you even get to them, let alone try to save them. And yet you kind of have to go. Where I live, there was an episode a few years ago where two young kids, and they were good swimmers, but they also had wives and children. They had little kids, both of them. And that went in after. Conrad poses that kind of situation for me. It makes you... I'm not quite sure I understood. I'm also quite deaf in this ear, so speak up a little bit.
How would you define history based on fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
This.
That book is there is history. Watson was a real man. There are newspaper accounts of all the killing on his plantation. There was newspaper accounts of his alleged killing of Belle Starr, the outlaw woman from Oklahoma, Missouri. But so much of it, I mean, if you read the paper work that's been done in his appearance in books, is so much of it's exaggerated. It became a huge myth, partly because his family would never go to his defense. They wouldn't mention him. He was the all in the South, the shadow cousin. And so as a result, the legend grew way out of, even in responsible hands, and it was probably encouraged by local people where he was. They wanted to tell the visitors when they probably wanted to hear that this guy was a Bluebeard, you know. And so you're not dealing with history anymore. And the only hard facts I could find, as I say, were on gravestones, probably records and stuff like that. I got some, and I could intuit from a lot of other things I found, including first-hand accounts. And there were a few old people still in Southwest Florida who I interviewed. One of them remembered him right up to the age of 16, remembered him very well because he came every week for lunch at his father's house and liked him very much. And it was all, and I kept hearing about this likability, either that he was merry, that he was a very good storyteller, he was funny, that he loved his children, was very gentle with his children, and demonstrative at a time when, you know, American men, I think maybe men everywhere, but in that period they were very undemonstrative. The children should be seen and not heard, you know, that act. And so Watson had all these good qualities. All of his 3 wives loved him. All his children loved him except for one. And his lady friends loved him. There were quite a few of those as well. And he had some other children. Everybody seemed to think he was a good guy, even the guys who killed him. So he became, for me, a fascinating figure, and I was interested, you know, in the balance between myth and legend. You know, he became mythic because there was a dig to find out who he really was. Because I had a free hand. I could make him who I want to transgress what is known in the public record. I suggest in that introduction that I also, to the extent the writer has to dig into himself, I have to see, well, all of us, you know, if the right buttons are pressed or killers, all have that potential if the things go wrong. I was interested in just trying to make him a human being. Afraid of him not because he's a monster, but because he's a man. They're afraid of him because he makes them look at that potential for violence that's in all of us, you know. I was very pleased, actually, with some of the reviews that came out. That people were feeling rather guilty about it, but they said, you know, when he hurt themselves, they developed a certain liking for him because they were tempered for very good reasons. He considered his childhood.
We had a discussion about Mr. Watson last week. And
2 of my questions. One was, is there a link of that device that would cripple a biography?
Because you don't have to be, you know, impeded by it. I'm just saying that's true. And then in the last volume of the trilogy, Bone by Bone, then you have a clear, unadulterated presentation of Watson's voice. It's his, you know, telling the same story. And
but it's not the same story.
It's not the same story. It's quite different. And Watson is telling it from the horse's mouth, and then you have to decide how much you believe the horse. No. So you really have to make your own conclusion. I'm going to be reading this afternoon, so it's a new version. He thinks he's going to work with that version, but it'll be so different by the time.
This isn't a retirement project, I'm afraid.
You know, this is the episode when she's actually killed. There's no 2 versions of what happened to her. In the last book, you have to decide how well did I know this man.
If I may, when I sent you the first draft of, or an early draft of an essay on that trilogy, and I said it may not be historical, but everything is history, and this kind of history makes a wonderful way of telling. You marked that passage in your answering letter, which prompted Grace Moshtaba to say, "Living writers kick back." You said, this is not historical. It is not that sentimental nonsense of an historical novel, which isn't really, but that points toward something that is a little bit different than you've been talking about in history. And it seems to me that points to the form of the novel, and might very well take us back to Conrad and fictional form and first-person teller, stories within stories within stories.
Yeah.
Could I ask questions?
See, I tell
These
you
people
what,
know that.
The historical novels, you know, that I think of as historical novel are those big silver books on airports. You find big busty, what they call bodice rippers, you know, out in the trade. And I think of those as being the real historical novels. And here is historical figures being given the dialogue. Generally, the dialogue is completely out of keeping with the times those people lived, and so very few people do that skillfully, and it cannot be like the way they talked then. It should be at least a simulation and not have like, well, I just always resisted that. So I had to make sure that this Watson is, even I believe, it's closer to the truth than the legendary one. Nonetheless, there are some historical novels which are wonderful. It's just the phrase I don't like because they're immediately put down in a low ending, which they usually are. They deserve to be. Everything. But you take, there's a very good writer in Virginia named George Garrett. I don't know if you've ever read. He's a very uncovered trilogy of novels about Sir Francis Drake. And that whole, Sir Francis Raleigh, sorry. And it's beautifully written, fascinating. There's not seen horrible language at the time. And it's the Fox. It's a terrific book. That's one of them. Poet too. He's a poet. He's a very good poet too. He's an excellent writer. He's very underestimated. That's a different matter entirely. That's not, and I don't consider those historical novels.
But the language of your book is historical, and the situation of the environment in the Everglades is historically accurate.
That's the environment. That's something else again. I'm always grinding my axe. Can't come to that. Al Irving, novelist, he said, "You're making a great mistake. You go to the investigative reporter in me. I wanted to get those facts and be strict about my interpretation and try to make it. So it does tie your hands a little bit. My informant, who was the granddaughter of Leon Hamilton, the racism of Florida at her time. It was terrible, outrageous, but when I made her threaten to kill me if I'd ever appear in West Florida again. My friend, I stayed at her house, and her husband is blonde. They're very fair people, and they are now a very successful family in that part of Florida, far more successful than all redneck families. And as I discuss in the second book, Lost Man's River, this family, too, they're towering racism and all its ugliness. I'm down there anyway. I wasn't going to, not go to Southwest Florida. So I was giving a talk in Naples, Florida, reading, and then suddenly it was over, and people all stood up, and when the crowd filed out, there she was in the front row looking at me like this, and she had a great big. What are we going to have? A shootout of Naples? So I actually, knowing, that part of Florida, they, with guns, I couldn't be too sure. I really wasn't so sure that she wouldn't try to do something stupid, I fooled her a little bit. I just, I think casually and with as much grace as I could muster, I hopped down off the stage and stepped over very quickly and sat down next to her on the bag side and more or less pinned her in her seat until we got there. And then we talked, and I was very angry at first. She was very angry, and then she talked it out, and then she burst into tears and gave me a big hug. Because we've been kind of dear friends, really. And I don't think she kind of wandered off the question. I'm sorry about that.
I have a more technical question. How do you learn?
I think I have a good ear, but sometimes you really have to work at it. I wrote a book called Far Tortuga, which is in the Caribbean dialect, which is much harder than this. I can actually, with a little practice, I can go down into Florida or Alabama, Mississippi, and start talking like those people. In a very, very short time, I can swing right into it. And I don't find that very hard. But I do, but the Caymanian dialect was hard for me.
Modern time.
And it was so much so that I went on these, I was doing a travel piece for the New Yorker. That's where it all began. A fact carriage on a turtle schooner down to Nicaragua. Fully, I had to tape. I taped the lalo. And I had to simplify it because it's actually Chaucerian English. It goes all the way back to Chaucer and mixed in with dialect from all over the Caribbean, Indian, black, everybody, fine. It's a very wonderful, fine, elegant thing.
Sample from this book, for example, or from Chavez?
Well, just all of it in general.
Like these guys cracking jokes.
Yeah.
told me last night that he has more of a sense of humor than with Faulkner.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those, did you hear them or come across them? I mean, I was wondering if, they really talked like this back.
No, sometimes you got to make a little leap of faith. And I have to admit that I introduced a few. However you feel, there are certain jokes that have probably been around for 200 years, like, piss out of the boot with the instructions written on the heel.
Yeah.
Now that's been around for a while. And actually, William Gaddis used it too. We both learned it from the same source, which is a mutual friend. I don't know where he.
I learned it from trying to empty my boot. A lot of that stuff comes out, though, as we'll see when we get to Lost Man's River. In the archive, you've got notes in your notebooks about bumper stickers you saw, for example. Got guns and guts.
Guns are good.
Got guns and guts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some others that we'll see when we get there.
All over Texas was forgiving her the finger because she was driving around with a bumper sticker that said, "A village in Texas is missing its idiot." Oh boy, that's in Texas. That took guts to drive around with.
Him? He's really a nice guy.
Good question.
Go ahead.
Is Watson to you a hero?
Is Watson what?
Is Watson a hero for you?
No, he can't be a hero. And the people were right to object. You can't have a society with a man who is a certifiable killer in it. And if you tolerate that, your society is crumbled already. Sooner or later, you've got to make a move, whatever the risk is. Even if you like him, he has to be removed. This guy was just too dangerous. Hero. But he is a human being. See, I agree with his wife. But he's not a monster. He's a man. Second book, or rather the third book, I make it very clear how he got that way. Not that all kids. You get a lot of kids who are very, very badly abused and beaten, especially by a drunken father. And not always, but a lot of them do turn into kind of in a criminal way. But a lot of them don't. This is one of the great mysteries. A lot of kids are just beating the hell out of them, and they seem to come out okay. And some of the best kids I ever saw were street urchins in Seville in Spain. And these kids were all living under the highway. They were living in viaducts and places like that. They didn't have any home. I never saw such a cheerful, salty bunch. And I do not think they were criminally inclined. They were very quick-witted. They certainly stole and food and stuff like that. But I didn't feel they were permanently damaged. Maybe they're better off without those parents. So
I'm troubled by the word hero.
Well, everyone, why do we like him? Why do we hate him? So I was just wondering if, in your eyes, he was a hero.
In some ways, in the sense that he accepts who he is, and you'll see in the other volumes, he knows when he's had it. He accepts his fate a little bit, you'll see he behaves pretty well considering everything. I don't believe he ever raised his gun to fire into that crowd that killed him. I think he tried to bluff them many times before one out. If he could get away with it again, okay. But I think he was resigned to the fact that he might not make it through that, and that he said, I don't know. But see, I don't want to. In case you have to, Jim forces you to read the other two books. I don't want to, pull those books or taint them by my own interpretation. Invite other interpretations. I want people. When somebody reads your book entirely opposite from the way you would. I had a friend called Harold Humes, and had a magazine called Parish. Humes was brilliant, and he was great fun to talk books about. And I'd show him my manuscript, not because he ever had anything useful to say. He never did. But he'd argue a wrong-headed opinion so brilliantly that in combating him and fighting off this terrible he said, you've got to kill off this guy by chapter 3. And if you did, you'd ruin the whole book. But his reasons for doing that were very, very, kind of exhilarating. So in fighting that off, it clarified my whole way of looking at the book, which is enormously valuable, far more valuable. This is great, hey, I want somebody. He was just, you know, that kind of stimulation is terrific. I don't know how I got to this point, but how do I get there?
I don't know.
You're a hero. See, I want to pin you down because I don't. I mean, hero is just a big, juicy generality, and well, you haven't seen the last version of this increasingly long essay about the composition history of the trilogy. I mean, here's an essay published in 1999. You've just finished the trilogy, and you talk a lot about how long you've worked on this. You're asked if it's your magnum opus. You say, I heard the story as a boy sailing up the west coast of Florida about the dark house at the end of the dark river and the man.
The only house in the Everglades.
Yes, the man there who was shot to death by neighbors. It's been a lifelong obsession. I'm never going to let it go. You say...
You're holding me to this?
Well, but sure. But I'm also holding you to, I mean, I'm trying to get at a reading of the novel that is mine, I guess. And so, because God knows I should be quiet, you're right. 33 bullets, according to the sheriff, were removed from his body during the autopsy. The reader accompanies him in his head right to that last fatal shot, by which time I hope, one understands this man at last. That's the challenge, to discover the humanity in such a man and even perhaps forgive him. And my contention is that anybody who has a figure like that, who has really been an obsession, and it is still an obsession. I mean, you can't let him go. He started out this novel to write it as one novel. It became 3 over a period of 20 years. And now he's rewriting it again.
Came 3 the day I lugged it into Random House. It stood as high as I did on the floor.
I know how high it stands. I've read that stuff. But
my editor just hailed.
There is something deeply, what did you say? Strangely, as you said, in deep places, heroic about E.A. or E.J. Watson, it seems to me. And I called him last week a tragic hero. And
he is a tragic, like any.
What you just said about him, where could he ever go? I could say about Macbeth.
Yeah, but I find Macbeth is a very attractive figure.
Oh, well, he is to me. He is
no,
to me.
Because he's weak in the face. He's bullied into terrible deeds by his wife. I think it's true that Watson is a tragic hero because you sense that he has so much potential. He's good at everything. He cannot hold his temper.
Jane Dye says when she says, "There's a wound in your father that I couldn't heal."
Yeah.
And that's the emphasis. Now, I really do want to shut up, but these guys, you would never know that this group was the same group as we met last week.
Well, we're trying to be polite and get.
It's nothing. This is where politeness stops. This is where we indeed.
It reminded me of something that I highlighted in Chelsea. When you the poorest of these guys and give them that ranch over there, he would be just as much of a bastard as the guys. I thought that was a pretty wise statement of Chavez there.
Chavez was a very wise guy. Chavez was a hero. He really was a hero. He was a hero to me. All Americans I've ever met. He was the greatest. They were supposedly great men, but Cesar Chavez was great. He sacrificed himself for no money and no pay with the claim, and he just went out and did that all the time I was working with him. He was the most human guy and very humorous. But he's tough when he says that you give a guy, I'll have these buttons. And as soon as the guy gets something, then he wants to sit on that and burn the bridge behind him, And that is true. We all have a greedy side. And he has to deal with he's running a tough union situation. He doesn't.
I have a sense, I can relate to Watson. Yeah, he's coming to, he might be on the next.
Watson is a killer in the sense that he certainly didn't kill 55 people, but to separate him from at least 7 killings. but he's not a natural born killer like Leslie Cox. Cox is
There are monsters.
Cox is finally goes over to being a monster, I think.
There's a line between.
I think Watson's real guilt is that he's not a natural killer. He doesn't like killing people particularly. I don't know, particularly.
Just
I
reason
wouldn't-
to
Favorite point out.
I didn't kill him, so you
Well,
don't notice.
hey, Johnny Cash just died.
Yeah.
Folsom Prison Blues.
Yeah,
Shot
but-
a man in Reno just to see him die.
Yeah, well, that's different. That's a different order of thinking. But what Watson does do, and you begin to see the pattern, is that with his distaste for killing, he's very skillful. Young men are very attracted to him. They think he's a Wild West, whatever, and they're very influenced by Watson. And he uses these young men, beginning with his own son, Rob, as it turns out, and this is why Rob hates him. This is the older brother of Lucius and Cobb. This is, to me, very reprehensible indeed.
Watson could be like,
I hadn't thought of that.
and it struck me. I didn't know if you were trying to make.
I wasn't trying to, but I wasn't trying to consciously, but sometimes you do things subconsciously. I don't think, though, so that doesn't ring a bell with me. I don't think so.
But
But
Chavez
in a
is
sense,
historical, right?
they are. I mean, they're both very, very gifted people who, and one of them makes the very most of his potential, and the other one, are young, appropriately, very young for them. And,
Chavez is historical, whereas
Chavez is historical. That's really the way I saw it, the way I interpreted it. And I do know from a newspaper account that I quoted that Watson's father was a terrible bully, a drunkard and a bully. His name was Reno. As I met Caesar's parents in San Jose, and they were lovely. And
So close to me.
whether you're telling fiction or nonfiction, you're still telling a story. The only difference is one of them you're stuck with the facts, and but you still have to tell a good story. And you can tell a fascinating set of facts in a stupid or badly constructed way, and it'll come out. Any good story can be made boring with a little effort. And so you always remember that, and you try to structure a book or even a short story accordingly. And I don't know. I just maybe. For example, I think a flaw in killing Mr. Watson, a distinct flaw, is that I get some love of and I seem like humor of these guys. By the way, I work for all kinds of very, very funny inventor. So they're just kind of a laid back, but I think that I couldn't resist a funny situation. So in this township that you're dealing with, I want it all to sound like Mr. Watson's humor, which is a lot my idea of humor. I do want it to be funny. The only trouble is that if you put humor in a situation which is grim, a lot of people won't pick it up at all. And that novel, Playing the Fields of the Lord, I thought it was a hoot.
It is.
I really thought it was hilarious.
It is.
Some of it. But you know something? In no review that I ever read, and very few of the people who read it and talked to me about it, kind of obliterated it. And finally, a guy called me up about 3 years after the novel came out. And the guy didn't. Thank you. I'm so grateful to hear that.
I just want to read a passage from at some point I want to ask about the letter writer, Watson.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't interest anybody else, it's fine. But about midway through the novel, and as you will see, I've reproduced several of the versions of what you call bios in the manuscript, and I've reproduced several versions of the prologue because this is a really research project, and I want them to see what you can do with archival research a little bit. So I'll distribute that to you. We're going to take a 5-minute break here pretty soon, and I'll distribute those, and we'll talk about them next week. But there's a lot in those bios where you seem to me to be trying to work out the difference between history and storyteller, and what the historian is and what he isn't, and so forth. And a lot of that gets cut out of the book. But about midway through the book, the historian writes, and I call him historian, the letter writer, um, wants to know why Mr. Watson is so fascinating, not only to the Dimmicks and later writers, but increasingly, dare I admit this, to the undersigned, who of course never signs.
He will sign it, although I'm cutting out all of it anyway.
As a
except for one or two, and he will sign those.
As a professional historian, far be it from me to have the writer stop writing. I mean, I want. As a professional historian, I had thought myself beyond such subjectivity, yet the enigma of our subject's character grows rather than lessens with each new fact unearthed. However much the vulgar legend is deflated, how else to explain that 7 decades after his death, Ed Watson remains the most celebrated citizen of the southwest coast of Florida ever produced. Now, I mean, that's the historian saying...
That isn't saying much, by the way, because the southwest coast of Florida is almost depopulated until you get as far north.
You know, Peter, you say something like that in Celsi Poetis about Chavez, that you had come expecting to be organized and
Enlisted.
and you enlisted in what I take to be, and I don't want to talk about Chavez himself now. I want to talk about the Chavez in Celsi Poetis, the character named Chavez. You admit that you can't, that you're so fascinated that you're buying into stuff that you didn't think you were going to buy into. And in the book, I mean, not nearly so much in the articles, but in the book, a lot of that gets extended, and I mean, that's great, because I think we do buy into people we admire. But Chavez becomes, he's historical, yes, but
he's also a man, or as a man, and he would interest me as a fictional.
He's legendary.
Yeah.
And the reason, in fact, I asked them to read these two books together is because, as Adam says, Chavez is, in a sense, in 1968 and 9, what you say Watson isn't. But in fact, they're both written, and therefore they're both as characters in books. Although Chavez is more documentary.
But I want his humanity to come across all the same, and I think it does. It's amazing, when I finished that book, which is very, and openly so, I don't hide my admiration for him. I think he's terrific. With him, and I really enjoyed him as a friend. I think we're the same age. We had the same experience, sporting figures. We were in the Navy at the same time as a lot in common with this guy, and it was very fond of him. Oh, I guess that's it. And he trusted me. He told me all. Oh, even affectionate and admiring as that book is, do you know that his aides, white aides especially, objected. I said that Caesar sometimes could be unreasonable during a fight with his son. They were little tiny things, in his little flaws of character, but small ones. I've seen him with his family. I had dinner with him. I ate at their house. I lived with his family. It was a very good family. Plaster scene. Well, I won't say. You don't want to read about that. You want to read about a human being. What is it, about him? And I showed the book to Caesar. Now, Caesar, I'll show you how crafty he was. He's very astute, even though he's a lovely, sweet, gentle, self-sacrificing man. With this very, very bad back, terrible bad back. And one time I arrived with a back injury incurred in a touch football game at home. We both spent the whole weekend in this sort of hot bath pool, interviewing him. And he had the copy of the manuscript by his bedside. He wasn't whining at all. He said, could you read a little bit of it to me? And over this I realized later he just completely taken me into camp. Having to be able to say to the membership that he hadn't read my book. Very delicate political situations between the Filipino workers and the Jewish workers, the few white workers. And he didn't want to be able to say he read a book so admiring of him. But he did want to know what was in it. Chavez, those passages, the politically correct people objected. I said, Caesar, I'm not going to make you perfect. You're not interesting. He said, oh. And he objected. objected to one thing in the whole manuscript, and that was very mildly, I forgot now what it was, might have hurt his wife's feelings. You know, he didn't care about
And the Union published the book as a broadside.
later on.
Yeah. The book came out, according to Roberson's bibliography.
Well, they probably did. I just
We'll take 5 minutes and we take a bathroom break here after an
Okay.
hour and come back and we'll
Okay,
get
by me, Jim.
get you another cup of coffee.
I don't think I need it.
Okay.
I do it fine.
Shall we do that? And some of you have been strangely silent. Won't work.